I received an inheritance of $5 million and decided to put my son to the test. I called him and told him I'd lost everything, that I needed to move into his house the very next day. He responded with enthusiasm. He told me yes, absolutely, to come right away. But the following morning, when I arrived with my bags at his front door, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And what I discovered that day changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. My name is Olivia, but everyone calls me Liv. I'm 71 years old, and until a week ago, I lived in a small apartment on the north side of the city, a modest place with walls that held 40 years of memories, yellowed photographs, and the silence of someone who learned to live alone. My husband, David, died 8 years ago. Since then, life had settled into a quiet routine. I'd wake up, make coffee, look out the window, and wait. Wait for what? I don't know. Maybe I hoped to feel something again. Maybe I hoped someone would knock on the door and remind me that I still mattered. But no one came. The days passed, identical to one another, like faded copies of a life that once had color. I worked for 35 years at a garment production shop. I got up every morning before dawn, took the same bus, did the same job. I'm not complaining. It gave me a roof over my head, food, and the chance to raise my son, Miles. I raised him alone after his father left when Miles was just 6 years old. I did the best I could. We didn't have luxuries, but we never lacked anything essential. I taught him to be honest, to work hard, and to respect others. Or at least, that's what I thought I taught him. Because over the years, as he grew up and got married, something changed between us. The calls grew shorter, the visits more spread out. There was always an excuse: work, traffic, other commitments. And I learned not to push it, not to bother him, to take up the least amount of space possible in his life. I lived convinced that this was normal, that children grow up, move out, build their own lives, and that a mother needs to learn to let go. But deep down, very deep down, I always wondered if I really mattered to him, if he ever thought of me when he closed his eyes at night, if he remembered the times I skipped a meal so he could have new sneakers, if he valued the sacrifices I made without ever saying a word. I never complained or asked for anything in return, because that's how I was raised, to give without expectation, to love unconditionally. But unconditional love hurts when it's only coming from one side. 2 weeks ago, I received a call that changed everything. It was a lawyer named Julian Thorne. His voice was formal but kind. He told me that a distant uncle, someone I barely remembered, had passed away overseas. He had no children and no spouse, and his will named me as the sole heir. $5 million. When I heard that figure, I thought it was a joke. I thought someone was trying to scam me, but it was real. I had to go to the lawyer's office, sign documents, and listen to legal explanations that I barely understood. When I left that place, I walked down the street as if I were floating. Me, who never had more than $10,000 saved in my entire life. Me, who counted every dime before going to the grocery store. Me, who was used to living on a shoestring budget. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room staring at the empty walls, feeling the weight of that news like a rock on my chest. And then, in the middle of the silence, a thought came. A small thought at first, barely a whisper in my mind. What if Miles knew? What would he do? How would he react? And that thought grew, expanded, and turned into a question I couldn't ignore. I needed to know if my son loved me for who I am, or if he only tolerated me out of obligation. I needed to know if he would be there for me if I had nothing. If I fell, if I broke, if I lost everything, would he help me get back up, or would he leave me alone, as I had felt so many times in recent years? I know it sounds cruel. I know that testing your own child isn't something a mother should do. But after so many years of feeling invisible, of wondering if I truly mattered, I needed an answer. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt, even if it broke my heart, because living in doubt is worse than living with certainty, even if that certainty is painful. So I made a decision. I wouldn't tell him anything about the inheritance. Instead, I would make him believe I had lost everything, that I was in a desperate situation and needed his help. Depending on his reaction, I would know who my son truly was. I would know if the values I tried to instill in him still lived within him or if they had been lost along the way. I spent 3 days preparing. I rehearsed the conversation over and over in my head. I thought about every detail of the lie I was about to tell. It hurt to do it. It hurt to have to lie to him, but I needed that truth more than I needed to keep the peace. Because peace built on doubt isn't peace. It's just an uncomfortable truce with reality. And I was tired of living in that truce. I wanted to know. I needed to know. The day finally arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 5 o'clock. I sat on the living room sofa with the phone in my hand, my fingers trembling. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm the nerves that ran through my body like an electric current. I dialed Miles' number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt eternal. I was about to hang up, to forget this absurd plan, to settle for not knowing. But then I heard his voice. "Hey, Mom," he said. He sounded distracted, as if he were doing something else while talking to me. I heard background noise, maybe the TV or music. I felt a lump in my throat, but I kept going. "Miles, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking. Something very serious happened. There was a brief silence on the other end. "What happened, Mom? Are you okay?" he asked with a tone that tried to sound concerned, but still had that air of being only half present in the conversation. "I lost everything," I told him. The words came out easier than I expected, as if my mouth had decided to believe its own lie. "I had problems with the bank, with some debts I couldn't pay. They're taking the apartment. I have nowhere to go. I don't have money to rent another place." I paused, letting the silence do its work. "I need to stay with you for a while, Miles, just until I can figure things out. It won't be long, I promise. I just need a place to sleep while I find a way to get back on my feet." The silence that followed was different, heavier. I could almost hear his thoughts on the other end of the line. I imagined his face, his eyes searching for a way out, an excuse. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he spoke. "Sure, Mom. Come on over. You can stay with us as long as you need to. Don't worry about a thing. You can come tomorrow. I'll prepare the guest room. Everything is going to be fine." I felt something strange in my chest when I heard those words. It was a mix of relief and guilt. Relief because my son had said yes, that he would take me in, that he wouldn't leave me on the street. Guilt because I was lying to him, because I was manipulating the situation to get an answer. But there was also something else. Something I couldn't clearly define. A small alarm in my gut that told me his response had been too quick, too perfect, as if he had been waiting for me to say exactly that, as if he already knew what to say. "Thank you, my love," I replied with a broken voice, letting the tears that threatened to fall lend authenticity to my performance. "You don't know how much this means to me. I'll be there early tomorrow with my things." "Don't bring too much, Mom," he interrupted. "Just the essentials. We don't have a lot of space here, but we'll make it work." Yes, of course," I said. "Just a few bags. See you tomorrow then." "Rest easy, Mom," he said before hanging up. "It's all gonna work out." When the call ended, I sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen that had gone dark. It had worked. Miles had said yes. He had opened his home to me. I should have felt happy, relieved, proud of raising a son capable of helping his mother in a difficult time. But that strange feeling wouldn't go away, that small voice in my head whispering that something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my own lies were making me doubt everything, that my son had responded exactly as a good son should. But the doubt was already planted, growing like a weed in my mind. That night, I packed 2 suitcases. I put in clothes, some toiletries, old photographs, and a book I never finished reading. As I folded each garment, as I packed each item, I felt as if I were preparing for a one-way trip, as if by walking through Miles's door the next day, something fundamental would change forever. I didn't know exactly what, but I felt it in my bones. That silent certainty that only experience and age give you. I slept very little. I woke up several times during the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the early morning, the occasional cars passing on the street, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of the refrigerator. By 6 o'clock in this morning, I was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in my hands. I looked around. This apartment had been my refuge for so long. Every corner held a story. The stain on the wall where Miles threw a ball as a child, the window from where I used to watch him play outside, the table where we ate dinner together thousands of times, where I did homework with him, where we celebrated his birthdays with simple cakes and cheap candles. All of that was still there, waiting for me, but I was about to head into the unknown. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I called a cab. The driver helped me bring the bags down. We got into the car, and I gave him Miles's address. Miles lived in a middle-class neighborhood on the other side of the city, in a small but nice house that he and his wife Chloe had bought 3 years ago. I had only been there twice, once when they moved in, and again last Christmas. Both visits were brief, awkward, filled with forced silences and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Chloe was always polite to me but distant, as if I were an unwanted guest, tolerable only out of courtesy. She never said anything mean to me, never disrespected me, but she never made me feel welcome either, and Miles never said anything about it. He never stood up for my place in his life. He just let things be, without interfering, without taking a side. The drive lasted 40 minutes. I looked out the window the entire way, watching the streets, the buildings, the people walking quickly toward their jobs or their lives. I wondered how many of them were living their own lies, their own secret tests, their own family doubts. The cab finally stopped in front of Miles's house. I paid the driver, took out the suitcases, and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the beige house with its small front lawn and dark wood door. I took a deep breath. This is it, I told myself. There's no turning back. I walked toward the door, dragging the suitcases behind me. Each step felt heavy, loaded with expectation and fear. I reached the front porch, raised my hand to ring the bell, but before I could, something stopped me in my tracks. There was a sign that shouldn't have been there. And when I read what it said, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. For sale. Those 2 words were hammered into the front yard like a stake in my heart. A large white sign with red letters, impossible to ignore. For sale. I dropped the suitcases. They fell at my feet with a dull thump that I barely registered. My eyes couldn't look away from that sign. I blinked several times, thinking maybe I was seeing wrong, that my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, there it was, clear, real, undeniable. I approached the door, my legs shaking. I rang the bell once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Absolute silence. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to hear any sound from inside. Footsteps, voices, music, anything. But the house was dead. Empty. I knocked harder, now with my knuckles pounding the wood with growing desperation. "Miles!" I shouted. "Miles, it's me, your mom! Open up, please!" My voice sounded strange, high-pitched, broken, but no one answered. I walked to the window. I peered inside, cupping my hands around my eyes to see better through the glass. The curtains were drawn, but I could see some open spaces. The living room was empty. There was no furniture, nothing, just bare floors and white walls. A chill ran through my body, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the coldness of realization, of the horror that begins to take shape when the pieces of a terrible puzzle start to fit together. I stepped away from the window, taking a few steps back, unable to process what I was seeing. And then I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you looking for someone?" I turned around abruptly. It was an older woman, probably my age, with gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a light green sweater and denim pants. She had a shopping bag in her hand. She looked like the typical curious but kind neighbor. "Yes," I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I'm looking for my son, Miles. Does he live here? Or did he? What happened? Why is that sign here?" The woman made a face of understanding mixed with pity. "Ah, you must be Miles's mother," she said, nodding. "I'm Eleanor. I live next door. I saw you a couple of times when you visited." Yes, I replied impatiently. "Do you know where my son is? What happened here?" Eleanor put her bag down and moved a little closer. Her expression became serious, almost awkward. "Look, ma'am, I don't know exactly what happened, but there was a lot of activity here last night. I saw a moving van. I saw Miles and his wife, Chloe, rushing things out. They seemed to be in a big hurry. I went out to ask if everything was okay, and Chloe barely answered me. She said they had a family emergency, that they had to leave urgently. She didn't give me any more details. They loaded what they could into the van and left. It must have been around 10 o'clock last night." My mouth went dry. "Last night?" I repeated, almost voiceless. "But I called him yesterday afternoon. He told me to come today, that he'd prepare the guest room." Eleanor looked at me with those eyes that say more than words, with that look people give you when they know you're discovering something painful and they don't know how to help. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Hayes," she said with genuine compassion. "I don't know what to tell you. I just know they left last night and cleared the house out. Someone from the real estate agency came early this morning to put up the sign." I put a hand to my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. My son, my own son, had told me yes, to come, that I could stay with him. And as soon as we hung up the phone, as soon as that conversation ended, he packed his things and ran away. He ran away from me. He ran away from his own mother. The pain I felt in that moment wasn't physical, but it was as real as if a knife had been plunged into my stomach. It was a pain that rose from my gut to my throat, that squeezed my heart, that made me want to scream and cry at the same time. Eleanor put a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, ma'am. Would you like to come into my house for a minute? Have some water? Sit down?" I shook my head. "I need to find him," I said. "I need to know why he did this. Do you have any idea where they might have gone?" Eleanor sighed. "The truth is no. We never talked much with them. They were very private. But wait. Maybe Denise across the street knows something. She and Chloe sometimes chatted." Eleanor led me across the street to a house painted pale yellow. She knocked on the door, and a younger woman came out, maybe in her 50s, wearing glasses and a friendly expression. Eleanor quickly explained the situation. Denise looked at me with a mixture of surprise and sorrow. "Good heavens," she said. "How awful. Look, ma'am, I don't know much either, but I saw Chloe looking very nervous yesterday. I saw her talking on the phone in the yard. She seemed upset. I overheard some of what she was saying. I couldn't help it. She was talking pretty loudly. She was saying something like, 'We can't let her stay here. We have to leave before she arrives.' I thought she was talking about some problem with his family or something, but now that you tell me this, I think she was talking about you." Denise's words hit me like stones. "We can't let her stay here. We have to leave before she arrives." Before I arrived. My own daughter-in-law had convinced my son to abandon his home, to run away, to leave me stranded at the door like an undesirable stranger, and Miles had agreed. He hadn't fought back. He hadn't defended my place. He had simply packed his bags and left. I leaned against Denise's doorframe. I felt my legs giving out. The two women held me, helping me sit down on a step. "Breathe, Mrs. Hayes," Eleanor said. "Breathe deeply." But I couldn't. Air wasn't entering my lungs properly. Everything was spinning. Years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, working until my hands were raw. Years of giving him everything I could with the little I had, and now this silent, cowardly betrayal hidden behind a "for sale" sign. Denise went inside and came back with a glass of water. She handed it to me, and I drank slowly, feeling the cold liquid go down my throat. "Ma'am," Denise said softly, "I don't mean to intrude, but I think you deserve to know something else. Yesterday morning, before they left, I saw Chloe talking to a neighbor across the way. She was asking him if he knew of any cheap apartments for rent on the south side of the city. She said something like, 'We need to disappear for a while. We don't want anyone to know where we are.' The neighbor recommended a place toward the south side of the city, near the Central Market. I don't know if they went there, but that's the only thing I overheard." South side of the city, near the Central Market. It was an area I knew well. I had lived there many years ago when Miles was small. It was a modest neighborhood with old apartment buildings and affordable rent, the kind of place where someone would hide if they didn't want to be found, but also couldn't afford much. I stored that information in my mind like a painful treasure. I slowly stood up. Eleanor and Denise looked at me with genuine concern. "Thank you," I told them. "Thank you for telling me the truth." They nodded. "If you need anything, Mrs. Hayes," Eleanor said, "we're here. Don't hesitate to knock." I nodded without saying more. I walked back to Miles' house. I picked up my suitcases from the ground. I looked at them for a long moment. I had packed those bags, thinking I was coming to stay with my son, to share his roof, to receive his help in a time of invented need. But the need now was real. Not for money, but for answers, for justice, for understanding how the child I raised had turned into the man who abandoned me. I walked to the corner and hailed a cab. I gave the driver the address of my apartment. During the entire drive back, I didn't say a word. I just stared out the window, processing, feeling, understanding. My test had worked. I had gotten my answer, but it wasn't the answer my heart had hoped for. It was much worse. I arrived at my apartment around 11 o'clock in the morning. I climbed the stairs slowly, dragging the suitcases that now weighed twice as much, not because of their contents, but because of all the pain they carried. I opened the door and walked in. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The cold cup of coffee still on the kitchen table, the curtains half open, the dense silence of a place that knows something has changed, even if nothing has moved. I let the suitcases drop by the entrance and walked to the sofa. I sat down there, and for the first time since I saw that sign, I let the tears come. I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral. I cried for the naivete of believing my son was different. I cried for the years invested in raising someone who ultimately saw me as a burden. I cried for the version of myself that still had hope yesterday. I cried until there were no more tears, only a hollow ache in my chest and a bitter certainty in my mouth. When I finally calmed down, when the crying turned into ragged breaths and swollen eyes, I got up and went to the kitchen. I made more coffee. I needed to think clearly. I needed to decide what to do now. Because one thing was clear, this wasn't going to end here. I wasn't going to let Miles and Chloe believe they could treat me this way without consequences. I wasn't going to let them think I was so weak, so insignificant, that they could simply run away and forget about me. I sat at the table with the hot coffee in my hands. I thought about what Denise had told me, south side of the city, near the Central Market. It was a large area, but not impossible to search. I knew that neighborhood. I knew where the older, cheaper apartment buildings were. If Chloe had asked about cheap places, it was because they didn't want to spend much. They probably thought it was temporary, that I would eventually give up and stop looking for them, but they didn't know me as well as they thought. I finished my coffee and picked up the phone. I dialed Miles' number. It rang several times, but he didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. A third time. Voicemail. "Hey, this is Miles. Leave a message." His voice on the recording sounded cheerful, carefree, a version of him I no longer recognized. I hung up without leaving a message. Then I wrote him a text message. "Miles, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please contact me. Sent." I saw the 2 gray checks indicating the message had been delivered. I waited 5 minutes, 10, 15, nothing. He hadn't even read it. I lay down on the sofa and closed my eyes. I was tired, physically and emotionally exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying yesterday's conversation over and over. "Sure, Mom, come on over. You can stay with us as long as you need to." Those words that sounded so comforting yesterday were now like knives, lies wrapped in false affection. A perfect performance by a son who learned to say the right thing while planning to do the exact opposite. And Chloe. I always knew she didn't want me around. I always felt it in her cold gaze, in her forced smiles, in the way she found excuses to keep my visits short. But I never thought she would go this far, that she would convince Miles to abandon his own home just to avoid me. What kind of person does that? What kind of poison did she put in my son's head for him to agree to something so cruel? I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I ate something simple because my body needed it, even though I wasn't hungry. I took a long bath, trying to wash away not just the sweat, but also the feeling of humiliation that clung to my skin. I put on comfortable clothes and sat in front of the window to watch the sunset. The sky painted itself in orange and violet. Those colors usually looked beautiful to me, but today they only reminded me that the day was ending, and I was still without answers, without confrontation, without closure. At 8 o'clock that night, I received a notification on my phone. It was a message from an unknown number. For a second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Miles from a different phone. I opened the message. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Julian Thorne, the attorney. I just wanted to confirm that you received all the information about the inheritance. If you have any questions, I am at your disposal. We are set to meet next week to finalize the paperwork. Have a good evening." The inheritance. $5 million. I had almost forgotten about it in the midst of all this emotional chaos. That money that was supposed to change my life. That money that had given me the idea to test Miles. And now, ironically, that same money had become the answer to a question I never wanted to ask out loud. My son wasn't there for me when he thought I had nothing. So what would happen when he found out I had $5 million? The answer was so obvious it almost hurt to think about it. I stayed up late that night, planning, thinking, imagining scenarios. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I finally made a decision. I was going to find Miles and Chloe. I was going to confront them face to face, but I wouldn't tell them anything about the inheritance yet. First, I wanted to see how they reacted, what excuses they made up, if they at least had the decency to feel ashamed of what they had done. And then, depending on that conversation, I would decide what to do with the money, and with them. The next morning, I woke up early. I dressed in practical clothes, dark pants and a gray blouse. I pulled my hair back in a ponytail. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were still swollen from crying yesterday, but there was something different in my expression. A new hardness, a determination that wasn't there before. 71 years of silently bearing everything, being the self-sacrificing mother who never asked for anything. But that time was over. Today, I was going to make demands. Today, I was going to demand answers. I took my purse, some cash, and left the apartment. I took the bus toward the south side of the city. The trip was long, nearly an hour, crossing avenues full of morning traffic, street vendors on every corner, people rushing to their jobs. I got off near the Central Market, just as Denise had told me. The area was exactly as I remembered it. Old, 3- or 4-story buildings, peeling paint, dangerously low-hanging electrical wires, small shops with faded signs. I started walking the side streets, looking for apartment buildings. There were several, too many. I realized this was going to be harder than I thought. I couldn't just knock on every door asking for Miles. I needed to be smarter. I went into a corner store. An older woman was working behind the counter. I bought a bottle of water, and while paying, I asked casually, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know of any buildings around here that rent apartments? I'm looking for my son who just moved to this area, but I lost the exact address." The woman looked at me with those eyes that have seen everything in life. "There are several, my dear," she said. "The Santander building is 2 blocks from here. That one always has apartments available. There's also Los Alamos Residential, right behind the market, and the San Miguel building on the main avenue. Those are the most common ones around here." I thanked her and left the store with my mental list of places to check. I started with the Santander building. I went up to the 2nd floor where there was a small sign that said Administration. I knocked on the door. A middle-aged man with a mustache and a half-unbuttoned shirt opened it. "Good morning," I said. "I'm looking for information about an apartment that was recently rented. My son and his wife, I think they moved in the day before yesterday." The man looked at me with suspicion. "I can't give out information about tenants, ma'am. It's privacy policy." "I understand," I said, trying to sound desperate without exaggerating. It's just that I had a family emergency and lost contact with them. I just want to know if they're here. His name is Miles. Her name is Chloe. They're young. He's in his 30s. The man shook his head. Doesn't ring a bell. The only ones who rented this week were an older couple and a single student. I'm sorry. I walked down the stairs feeling defeated but not resigned. There were still 2 more buildings. I walked toward Los Alamos Residential. It was a larger 5-story building with a cream-colored facade stained by humidity and age. The front door was open. There was no security or doorman. I walked straight into the lobby, which smelled of dampness and fried food. There was a board with apartment numbers, but no administrative office in sight. I went up floor by floor, searching, listening. On the 3rd floor, I heard voices arguing in one of the apartments. I approached the door, trying to distinguish the voices, but they weren't familiar. I continued climbing. On the 4th floor, at the end of the hall, I noticed that one of the doors had a new doormat. The other apartments had old doormats or none at all. That detail caught my attention. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood in front of that door, holding my breath, trying to hear something from inside. Silence. Nothing. I knocked softly. Once, twice. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. I went down, frustrated. Maybe it wasn't this building. Maybe I was obsessing for no reason. I walked out onto the street and headed toward the San Miguel building on the main avenue. It was the farthest of the 3. It took me 15 minutes to walk there. When I arrived, I saw that it was a more orderly building than the others, with a glass door at the entrance and an intercom. There was a list of names next to the buttons. I started reading them one by one. Apartment 201, Rodriguez family. 202, J. Mendoza. 203, no name. 204, M. Hayes. M. Hayes, Miles Hayes. That was my son's last name. I felt my pulse quicken. It could be a coincidence. It could be someone else. But something in my gut told me no. I pressed the button for apartment 204. I waited. Nothing. I pressed again, holding it longer. Silence. I pressed a 3rd time. And then finally, I heard Chloe's voice through the intercom. "Who is it?" she said, annoyed, impatient. I froze for a second. It was her. I had found them. I swallowed and spoke as calmly as I could. "Chloe, it's me, Liv. I need to talk to you and Miles." The silence that followed was so heavy, I could almost feel it coming through the intercom. Then I heard muffled voices on the other side, whispers, something that sounded like a muted argument. Finally, Chloe spoke again. "We're not here. You have the wrong apartment." And she cut the connection. "We're not here." The most ridiculous phrase anyone can say when they've just answered the intercom. I pressed the button again. Nothing. Silence again. They were in there, ignoring me, hiding like children who think if they close their eyes, no one can see them. I felt rage rise in my throat like hot lava. I wasn't going to allow this. Not after everything. I waited. I stood at the entrance of the building, waiting. I knew that eventually someone would come in or go out, and I could slip inside. I didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, a young woman arrived with grocery bags. She opened the door with her key, and I quickly approached. "Excuse me," I said with a kind smile. "I'm going up to my son's apartment, but he forgot to open the door for me." The woman looked at me, saw my age, probably thought I was harmless, and let me pass. "Thank you, my dear," I said. I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. Apartment 204 was at the end of the hall on the right. I walked toward it with firm, decisive steps. I reached the door. I could hear movement on the other side. Low voices, footsteps. I knocked on the door forcefully. "Miles!" I shouted. "I know you're in there. Open the door right now." The movement on the other side stopped. Absolute silence. I knocked again, harder. "I'm not leaving until you open up and explain what the hell is going on. You can leave me standing here all day if you want, but I'm not moving." I waited 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, and then I heard footsteps approaching the door, the sound of the lock turning. The door opened just a few inches. It was Miles. His face appeared in the crack, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, an expression of guilt mixed with fear. "Mom," he said in a low voice, "what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice trembling with pure indignation. "What am I doing here, Miles? I came to your house like you told me to. I arrived with my bags like we agreed, and I found a for sale sign and an empty house. You stood me up. You ran away. You ran away from your own mother. That's what I'm doing here. I came for an explanation." Miles lowered his gaze. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, he began to say, but he stopped. Chloe appeared behind him. She had her arms crossed and a hard expression on her face. "Mrs. Hayes, this is an invasion of privacy," she said in a cold tone. "You can't just show up at our apartment unannounced like this." I laughed, a bitter, dry, humorless laugh. "Invasion of privacy, Chloe? Seriously? Yesterday my son told me to come live with them. He told me to pack my things, and you two fled in the middle of the night. Who invaded whose trust here?" Miles finally looked up. "Mom, it wasn't like that," he said. "It was an emergency. We had to move fast." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted him. "The neighbors told me everything. They heard Chloe say you had to leave before I arrived. It wasn't an emergency, Miles. It was a cowardly escape. An escape because you didn't want to take care of me when you thought I had nothing." Chloe took a step forward. "Look, ma'am," she said with a controlled voice, cold as ice. "The truth is, we can't afford to keep you. We barely have enough for ourselves. Miles doesn't have a stable job. I earn minimum wage. We don't have the space or the resources for another person. He wanted to say yes because he felt sorry for you, but I made him see reality. We can't, period." Her words were like slaps, each phrase calculated to wound. But what hurt me most was seeing Miles standing there, not defending anything, not saying anything, just timidly nodding to everything his wife said. "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" I asked my son directly, ignoring Chloe. "Why didn't you have the courage to tell me you couldn't help me? Why lie? Why make me believe yes and then run away like a thief in the night?" Miles opened his mouth, but Chloe spoke first. "Because you don't understand, ma'am. You've always been like this. Dramatic, manipulative, always playing the victim. Miles told me what you were like when he was a kid, always reminding him of everything you sacrificed for him, making him feel guilty for existing. And now you come with this story about losing everything. How do we know it's true? How do we know it's not just another one of your manipulations to force Miles to take care of you forever?" I felt my breath catch. Manipulative, dramatic, making him feel guilty for existing. Those words coming out of Chloe's mouth, but clearly planted there by private conversations with my son. Conversations where Miles had reinterpreted his entire childhood, where he had turned my sacrifices into burdens, my love into manipulation. I looked at Miles, searching for any sign that he didn't believe that Chloe was exaggerating, but he remained silent, head bowed, not contradicting anything. "Is that true, Miles?" I asked, my voice broken. "Is that how you see everything I did for you? As manipulation? As drama?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were red, glossy, but not from tears of sadness, but from discomfort. "Mom, it's not that," he started. Chloe interrupted him again. "Look, ma'am, that's enough. We need you to leave. We have nothing more to talk about. If you really lost everything, go to social services. Ask the government for help, but don't involve us in your problems." In that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was silent, like a crystal glass shattering underwater. A clean, definitive, irreversible break. I looked at Chloe, then at Miles, then at Chloe again. And then I spoke with a calm I didn't even know I possessed. "That's fine," I said. "I understand perfectly. I won't bother you anymore, but I want Miles to tell me. I want to hear it from his mouth. I want him to look me in the eye and tell me he can't help me, that he doesn't want to help me, that he prefers to leave me alone on the street. I want to hear him say that." Chloe was about to speak, but Miles raised a hand, stopping her. He looked at me for the first time in that entire conversation. He looked me straight in the eye, and in a trembling, almost inaudible voice, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't. We can't. It's better this way." I nodded slowly. "Better this way," I repeated. "For whom, Miles? For whom is it better?" He didn't answer. He just lowered his gaze again. Chloe closed the door in my face without another word. I heard the sound of the lock turning. I stood there in that empty hallway, looking at the closed door, processing what had just happened. I walked away from that door slowly, as if I were walking in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I went down the stairs, gripping the railing because my legs felt weak, shaky. I left the building into the midday light. The sun was high, bright, indifferent to my pain. People walked around me, busy with their own lives, unaware that I had just lost something fundamental. I hadn't lost my son at that moment. I had lost him a long time ago. Now I finally knew it. I walked aimlessly for several minutes. My feet led me toward a small park near the market. I sat down on a concrete bench under the shade of an old tree. Children were playing in the distance, mothers watching them, street vendors offering fruit and sodas. Life continued as always. The world didn't stop because my heart was broken into pieces. I pulled out my phone and looked at it for a long time, not knowing what to do with it. Part of me wanted to call someone, to tell someone what had happened, but who? I didn't have close friends. My coworkers had drifted away after my retirement. My family was small and scattered. I was alone, completely alone. And that loneliness now had a different weight. Before, it was a loneliness of circumstance. Now, it was a loneliness of abandonment, of rejection, of being considered a burden by the only person who should have valued me unconditionally. I thought about Chloe, about her poisonous words, dramatic, manipulative, making him feel guilty for existing. How was it possible for someone to reinterpret love that way? How was it possible that working 3 shifts to buy him school supplies was manipulation? That giving up my own dream so he could go to school was making him feel guilty? That giving him everything I had, everything I was, turned into something negative in his adult narrative? And the worst part wasn't that Chloe thought that. The worst part was that Miles had allowed it, accepted it, made it his own. I wondered at what point everything went wrong. At what point my son stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe Chloe planted those ideas little by little, year after year, poisoning every memory with her twisted interpretation. Or maybe Miles was always like that, and I just didn't want to see it. Maybe I was the blind one, the one who built an idealized image of her son that never matched reality. Maybe the grateful child I remembered never truly existed. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air entered my lungs, filling them with oxygen, but not with relief. Nothing alleviated the pain I felt. It was a different pain from the one I felt when my husband died. That was a pain of natural loss, of a cycle completed, of love ending due to inevitable circumstances. This was a pain of betrayal, of unrequited love, of an emotional investment that never bore fruit, of realizing too late that I had sacrificed my life for someone who didn't value it. I opened my eyes and looked at the phone again. I had a message. It was from the lawyer, Julian Thorne. "Mrs. Hayes, good morning. Confirming our appointment for Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning to sign the final inheritance documents. Please confirm your attendance. The inheritance. $5 million. The money that had triggered this entire painful test. The money that now had a completely different meaning." I took a deep breath and began to think clearly for the first time since leaving that apartment. Miles and Chloe knew nothing about the money. They had rejected me, believing I was poor, that I was a burden, that I had nothing to offer them. Their decision was based on that premise. Now I had to decide what to do with that information. I could call Miles right now, tell him about the inheritance, and see how he reacted. I imagined the scene, his surprise, his instantaneous regret, Chloe completely changing her attitude. Both of them begging for forgiveness, making up excuses, trying to win back my favor now that money was involved. The idea made me sick. I didn't want that. I didn't want purchased love. I didn't want my son to come back to me for $5 million. That would be even more painful than his rejection, because it would confirm that he never loved me for who I am, only for what I can give him. And if he came back now after rejecting me, it would only be out of self-interest. There would be no redemption there, no real reconciliation, only a transaction. I stood up. My legs weren't shaking as much now. I started walking back toward the bus stop. As I walked, the ideas sorted themselves out in my head. Miles had made his choice. He had chosen Chloe over me. He had chosen comfort over responsibility. He had chosen selfishness over filial love. That choice hurt, but at least it was clear. Now it was my turn to choose, and my choice wouldn't be driven by revenge or pain. It was going to be driven by dignity. I reached the stop and waited for the bus. When I got on, I found a seat by the window. During the entire ride home, I was thinking, processing, planning. By the time I arrived at my apartment, I had already made several decisions. First, I wouldn't tell Miles anything about the inheritance. At least, not yet. Not until I decided exactly what to do with that money and with our relationship. Second, I needed time to heal, to process this pain without pressure or rushed decisions. Third, and perhaps most important, I needed to redefine who I was without Miles at the center of my life. I walked into my apartment, and for the first time in days, I really looked at it. That small place with its old walls and worn furniture, that place that had been my refuge for so long. Now I could buy something better. I could buy a big house in a nice neighborhood. I could travel. I could do all those things I never could because I was always saving, always thinking about the future, always sacrificing myself. And for whom? For a son who considered me a manipulator, for a son who ran away from me in the middle of the night. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. I took out an old notebook I kept in a drawer. Writing had always helped me think. I started making a list. Things I want to do with my life. The first line took me several minutes to write because it involved admitting something difficult. Learn to live for myself, not for Miles, not for anyone else, but for me. I kept writing. Find a therapist. Yes, I needed to talk to a professional about all of this. I needed to process the pain in a healthy way. Travel to places I always wanted to see. Pick up hobbies I abandoned, make new friends, help other people. Maybe volunteer at a shelter or community center. Use the money to do something good in the world, something that would give me purpose beyond just being a mother. As I wrote, I felt something strange. It wasn't happiness. I was still far from that. But it was something like liberation, as if by writing those words, I was finally allowing myself to exist outside the role of the self-sacrificing mother. It was as if after 71 years, I was discovering that I could be more than that I had to be more than that. That night, I slept better than expected. Not well, but better. I had confusing dreams, fragments of memories mixed with invented scenes. Miles as a child playing in the park, Chloe slamming the door in my face, my husband smiling at me from somewhere far away, Julian Thorne handing me a giant check, all mixed up in the nonsensical logic of dreams. I woke up early the next day. It was Saturday. I made coffee, showered, and got dressed. I felt different. Still hurt, still processing, but different. Stronger, maybe, or perhaps just more resigned. I took my phone and wrote a message to Julian Thorne, the lawyer. Good morning. I confirm my attendance for Monday at 10 a.m. I would also like to consult you about options for investing or donating part of the inheritance. I need advice. Thank you. Sent. Then I opened Miles's chat. Our last exchange was 2 days ago. My unread message, my unanswered call. I started to write. Miles, after what happened yesterday, I understand your position. I won't bother you anymore. Everyone makes their own decisions and faces the consequences that come with them. I hope someday you understand what you lost, not money or material things. You lost someone who loved you unconditionally your entire life. That cannot be recovered. Take care. Live. I read the message several times before sending it. It sounded harsh, but fair. It sounded final because it was. I pressed send. I saw the message was delivered. This time he read it almost immediately. The 2 checks turned blue. I waited. I saw the 3 dots indicating he was writing something. The dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, his reply came. Mom, please don't be like this. Give me time to work things out with Chloe. This is complicated. It's not that I don't love you. I just need space right now. I read his message and felt a mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to that small sign that he still cared. But another part, the part that had matured painfully over the last few days, knew those were just empty words, excuses, emotional crumbs thrown out to keep me close just in case he needed me in the future. I didn't reply. I left the message unread and put the phone away. The rest of the weekend passed in a strange calm. I didn't write to Miles again, and he didn't press the issue further. I spent the time tidying my apartment, reading, and watching old movies I found on a television channel. Simple things that kept me busy without demanding too much emotionally. On Sunday afternoon, I called an old coworker, Brenda, with whom I had lost touch. We talked for nearly an hour. I told her a summarized version of what had happened, without mentioning the inheritance. She listened patiently, and finally said something that stuck with me. Liv, children aren't investment projects. They are independent people who make their own decisions. Sometimes those decisions hurt us, but we can't live our lives waiting for them to validate us. Her words were simple, but true. Monday came quickly. I got up early and got ready carefully. I chose a light brown dress I hadn't worn in years. I styled my hair nicely and even put on a little makeup. I wanted to look presentable, dignified, not like the broken woman I had been in the past few days, but like the woman who was trying to rebuild herself. I took a cab to Julian Thorne's office. The building was downtown, a modern glass and steel tower that contrasted with my world of old apartments and dusty streets. I went up to the 12th floor in a silent elevator with soft music playing. Julian's office was elegant but welcoming. Wooden floors, caramel-colored leather furniture, abstract paintings on the walls. The receptionist greeted me with a smile and offered me coffee. I accepted. Minutes later, Julian came out to greet me. He was a man in his 50s, gray hair perfectly combed, an impeccable dark suit, a kind yet professional expression. "Mrs. Hayes, it's a pleasure to see you," he said, shaking my hand. "Please come in." I followed him into his private office. He sat down behind a large, dark wood desk, and I settled into a chair across from him. He began pulling documents from a folder. "I have everything ready for you to sign," he explained. "There are several forms, but I will explain each one. Basically, you are confirming that you accept the inheritance and that you understand the tax implications. There are also documents from the bank where the money will be deposited. Once we sign everything, the process takes approximately 1 week, and the funds will be available in your account." I nodded and began to sign where he indicated my name, again and again, Olivia Hayes. Each signature felt surreal, as if I were signing my way into a completely different life. When we finished with the main documents, Julian closed the folder and looked at me. "You mentioned in your message that you wanted advice on investments or donations," he said. "I'd be happy to help you with that. Tell me what you have in mind." I took a deep breath. "The truth is, I've been thinking a lot these past few days," I began. "I'm 71 years old. I lived my entire life on a budget, working hard, sacrificing myself for my son, and now I receive this amount of money that I can't even fully comprehend. I want to use some of that money to live better, yes, to travel, to have a more comfortable place, to not worry about bills. But I also want that money to mean something. I want to help other people, especially older women who are alone, who were abandoned by their families, who don't have resources." Julian nodded, taking notes. "That is a noble idea, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "There are several ways to structure this. We could establish a giving fund, create a small foundation, or simply make direct donations to existing organizations that work with that population. Each option has different legal and tax implications. I would like you to give me a few days to prepare a detailed plan with options, and we can meet again to discuss it." "Perfect," I said. "Is there anything else?" I paused, hesitating whether I should tell him, but I needed to say it out loud. "My son doesn't know about this inheritance. I had problems with him recently. He rejected me when he thought I had nothing. And now I don't know if I should ever tell him. I don't know how to handle that situation." Julian looked at me with an expression that blended professionalism with genuine empathy. "Mrs. Hayes, legally, you have no obligation to inform anyone about this inheritance. The money is entirely yours to do with as you see fit." That being said, and I speak now not as your lawyer, but as someone who has seen many complicated family situations, my advice would be to take your time. Don't make rushed decisions about your son while emotions are raw. Give it time. Use these next few months to focus on yourself, on healing, on discovering what you truly want. Decisions about your son can wait. His words made sense. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "I need to focus on me first." Julian smiled. "Exactly. And when you are ready, whether you decide you want to share some of this with your son or not, it will be a decision you make from a place of clarity, not from pain." We said goodbye with a handshake. He told me he would contact me in a few days with the investment and donation plan. I left that office feeling strangely empowered. I took the elevator down and walked out onto the street. The downtown area was full of life: office workers on their lunch break, street vendors, tourists taking photos. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just observing. And then I made an impulsive decision. Instead of taking a cab back home, I started walking. I went into a bookstore I saw on the corner. It had been years since I bought a new book. I always got them used or from the library. I wandered through the aisles, touching the spines of the books, reading titles. Finally, I chose 3. One about traveling in Europe, another on meditation and emotional healing, and one of contemporary poetry. At the register, when the cashier told me the total, I pulled out my debit card without thinking twice. $53. Before, that would have been a fortune to me. Now it was insignificant. But the act of buying them, of not having to count every coin, felt like a small act of freedom. I left the bookstore with my bag of books and kept walking. I passed an elegant restaurant with tables on the terrace. I stopped. I looked at the menu displayed at the entrance, plates that cost what I used to spend on food for an entire week. I walked in. The waiter greeted me politely and led me to a table by the window. I ordered a pasta dish with seafood and a glass of white wine. While waiting for my food, I looked around. Couples chatting, groups of friends laughing, people dining alone, like me, but all seeming comfortable in their own company. When my food arrived, it was delicious. Every bite was a small celebration, not of the inheritance itself, but of finally allowing myself to enjoy something without guilt, without thinking about whether I should be saving that money for something or someone else. I ate slowly, savoring it, drinking the wine, and feeling it relax my tense shoulders. When I finished and paid the bill, $110 including the tip, I felt good. Not happy yet, but good. I walked a bit more before finally taking a cab home. When I arrived at my apartment, it was almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I checked my phone. I had 2 messages. One was from Brenda, asking how I was. The other was from Miles. My heart gave a little jump when I saw his name. I opened the message. "Mom, I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet?" I looked at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply immediately. I wanted to know what was so important. I wanted to believe that maybe he had reconsidered. But the other part, the part that was learning to protect itself, knew I wasn't ready yet. I put the phone away without responding. I made myself some tea and sat on the sofa with one of my new books, the one on meditation and emotional healing. I started reading. The first chapter talked about grief, not just grief over death, but grief over losses of all kinds, loss of relationships, loss of the version of someone you thought you knew, loss of expectations. Every word resonated with me, as if the author were speaking directly to me. That night, before going to sleep, I looked at Miles' message again. I still hadn't responded. I decided I would give him an answer, but not yet. Not when he wanted, but when I was ready. For the first time in my life as a mother, I was going to put my emotional needs first. I was going to decide the terms of our relationship, if there would even be one. And that felt terrifying, but also necessary. I lay down, thinking about all the things I could do with my new life, places I could visit, people I could help, versions of myself I could discover. 71 years old, and I was just beginning to live for myself. How ironic, how sad, how liberating, all at the same time. 3 days passed without me responding to Miles's message. 3 days during which he wrote 2 more times. The first message said, "Mom, please answer. I really need to talk to you." The second was more desperate. "Mom, don't ignore me. Something happened. I need to see you." Each message made my heart ache a little, but I stuck to my decision. I wasn't ready. And more importantly, I needed him to understand that I wasn't at his disposal every time he decided he needed me. During those 3 days, I kept busy. I called Brenda, and we arranged to meet for coffee. It was the first time in years I had gone out socially with someone who wasn't family. We sat in a small cafe near my house and talked about everything. Our years at the production shop, how our lives had changed since then, and her grandchildren who visited every weekend. I didn't tell her about the inheritance, but I did share more details about what had happened with Miles. She listened without judgment and finally told me something that felt like a hug. "Liv, you deserve people in your life who value you. If Miles can't be that person right now, then you need to surround yourself with people who can. You are not alone, even if it feels that way sometimes." I also spoke with Julian Thorne. He presented me with several options for structuring the donations I wanted to make. The one I liked best was creating a permanent fund that would provide scholarships and financial aid to women over 60 in vulnerable situations. I decided to allocate $1 million to that fund. The rest I would divide among secure investments for my future, a new house, travel, and a reserve for emergencies. Julian would take care of all the legal paperwork. I would sign the final documents the following week. On Thursday afternoon, 4 days after Miles's last message, I finally decided to reply, but not in the way he expected. Instead of immediately agreeing to meet, I wrote, "Miles, I received your messages. If you need to talk, we can do it, but it will be on my terms." Sunday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Central Park, by the main fountain. "If you don't show up, there won't be another opportunity." His response arrived in less than a minute. "I'll be there, Mom. Thank you. I love you." I read that "I love you" with a mixture of skepticism and pain. Easy words to say when you need something, much harder to prove with actions when there's nothing to gain. I put the phone away and mentally prepared myself for that meeting. I knew I had to decide what I would tell him, what I wouldn't tell him, and above all, what boundaries I would set, no matter what he said. Sunday arrived with a partly cloudy sky. I dressed in comfortable clothes, khaki pants, and a white blouse. Nothing special. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard to impress him. I arrived at the park 10 minutes before 3. The main fountain was surrounded by families, children running, couples sitting on benches. I found a place with some privacy and sat down to wait. Miles arrived right on time. I saw him approaching from a distance. He was walking quickly, nervously. He wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt, as if he had dressed in a hurry. When he reached where I was, he stopped about 3 feet away. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded without saying anything. I stayed seated, and he sat down next to me on the bench, leaving a comfortable space between us. There was an uncomfortable silence. Finally, I spoke. "You said you needed to talk. I'm listening." Miles took a deep breath. "Mom, things with Chloe aren't good," he began. "Since you came to the apartment, we've been fighting a lot. She says awful things about you, and I can't take it anymore." I paused, waiting for him to continue. "And?" he said, his voice breaking. 2 days ago. She told me she was leaving. She said I was useless, that I would never amount to anything. She packed her things and left. She left me with the apartment rent, the debts, everything. And I don't know what to do, Mom. I don't know how I'm going to pay for everything. That's why I needed to see you. I need your help." There it was, the truth behind his urgency, the truth behind his "I love yous" and his "I need to see you." It wasn't genuine regret. It wasn't remorse for how he had treated me. It was need again, always need. I looked him in the eyes. "Miles," I said, my voice calm but firm, "let me see if I understand this correctly. When you thought I had nothing, when I had supposedly lost everything and needed a place to stay, you and Chloe ran away. You left me stranded at the door with my suitcases. Chloe told me I was manipulative, dramatic, a burden, and you didn't say anything. You didn't defend me. You didn't set boundaries. You just accepted everything she said and slammed the door in my face." He lowered his gaze. "I know, Mom, I know. I made a terrible mistake." I continued. "And now that Chloe has left you, now that you're alone with financial problems, now you remember me? Now you need your mom? Not because you love me, not because you're truly sorry, but because I'm useful to you? Because you need something from me?" He looked up, tears in his eyes. "No, Mom, it's not like that," he protested. "I really am sorry. I truly realize the mistake I made. I need you, yes, but not just for money. I need you because you are my mom, and I feel horrible about what I did." His tears seemed real. His pain seemed genuine. But I was no longer the same woman who would have fallen for those tears a week ago. I was no longer the mother who settled for emotional crumbs of regret. "Miles," I said, "for 30-something years, I was there for you every time you needed me, every single time. No conditions, no questions asked. I gave you everything I had, everything I was, and the first time, the only time, I needed you. You failed me. You didn't just fail me. You abandoned me in the cruelest way possible." "But Mom, I can change," he said desperately. "Give me a chance to prove it to you." I remained silent for a long moment. Then I spoke. "There is something you need to know, Miles, something that changes the whole context of this situation." He looked at me confused. "What is it, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "I never lost anything. I was never in financial trouble. It was all a test. 2 weeks ago, I received an inheritance from a distant uncle, $5 million. I wanted to know if you would be there for me if I had nothing, and I got my answer." Miles's face changed. It went from confusion to shock, from shock to understanding, from understanding to horror. "What?" he whispered. $5 million? And you did all this as a test?" I nodded. "That's right. And you failed, Miles. Completely." He stood up abruptly. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice starting to rise in volume. "You set a trap for me. You manipulated me. This is exactly what Chloe said about you. You're manipulative, Mom. How could you do this to me?" I stood up too, looking him straight in the eyes. "I did this to you, Miles? I put you through a test like this, a test any decent child would have passed without a problem. I asked for your help, believing I had nothing, and you ran away. That was your choice, not mine. You chose to abandon me. I just created the circumstances to see your true character. And I saw it. I saw it clearly." He shook his head, visibly distressed. "And now what, Mom? Did you come here to rub it in my face? To tell me you have millions while I'm broke? To get revenge?" "I didn't come to get revenge," I told him. "I came to tell you the truth and to set boundaries. Miles, I love you. You are my son and you always will be. But I can no longer be the mother who gives everything without receiving anything in return. I can't keep waiting for you to value me when you clearly don't. So this is what's going to happen. I am going to live my life. I am going to use that money to do things I always wanted to do and to help people who genuinely need it. And you are going to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Without Chloe, without me, just you. Maybe when you achieve that, When you truly grow up and mature, we can rebuild something. But it won't be soon, and it won't be on my old terms." "But Mom," he began to say. I interrupted him. "No buts, Miles. This is my decision. You can be angry with me. You can think I'm manipulative, as Chloe led you to believe. You can think whatever you want, but I know the truth. I know I gave you the best of me your entire life. And if that wasn't enough, if that didn't create a sense of loyalty or filial love in you, then that says more about you than it does about me. Goodbye, Miles. When you're ready for a real conversation, without needing anything from me, you know where to find me." I turned and started walking away. "Mom, wait!" he shouted behind me, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, my legs trembling but firm, my heart broken but resolute, tears in my eyes, but my head held high. I didn't look back. I walked through the park without a clear direction for several minutes. The tears finally began to fall when I was far enough away from Miles. They weren't tears of regret for what I had just done. They were tears of liberation, of grief, of closing a painful chapter in my life. I sat down on a secluded bench under a large tree that offered shade and privacy. I cried silently while watching the happy families around me. Fathers pushing swings, mothers chasing their toddlers, grandparents sharing ice cream with their grandkids. Scenes I had once dreamed of having with Miles and his future children, scenes I might never have. But as I cried, I also felt something else, something I didn't expect. I felt peace, a strange, uncomfortable but real peace. Peace from having spoken my truth, peace from having set boundaries, peace from having chosen myself for the first time in decades. I took a tissue from my purse and wiped away my tears. I breathed deeply. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and flowers. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Life went on, and I would go on too. I stayed seated there until the sun had completely set. Then I got up and walked toward the park exit. I took a cab home. During the ride, I looked out the window without thinking about anything specific, just watching the city go by, lights turning on in the buildings, people leaving restaurants and theaters, the world spinning, indifferent to my small personal drama. And that was okay. I didn't need the world to stop for me. I just needed to find my place in it. I arrived at my apartment, and the first thing I did was make myself some tea. I sat on the sofa with the warm cup in my hands and turned on the television. I put on a nature documentary channel, images of mountains, oceans, forests, places I would visit someday, places I could visit now. I drank my tea slowly as the images transported me far away from my apartment, far from my worries, far from the pain. That night, I slept profoundly. I didn't dream anything I remembered, just a deep, restorative, necessary, black sleep. I woke up on Monday feeling different, lighter, as if I had left an enormous weight at that park yesterday. I made coffee, had a good breakfast, and sat down to plan my day. First, I would call Julian Thorne to confirm that I wanted to proceed with all the plans we had discussed. Second, I would start looking for houses. I didn't want anything too big or ostentatious, just a more comfortable place, with good natural light, maybe a small yard. Third, I would research painting or pottery classes. I'd always wanted to learn some kind of art, but never had the time or money. I called Julian at 9 o'clock in the morning. I confirmed everything with him. He told me the money was already available in my account and that the paperwork for the donation fund would be ready to sign on Friday. He also recommended a trusted real estate agent to help me look for a house. I thanked him and hung up, feeling productive, with purpose. The following days were a mix of new activities and moments of reflection. I visited 5 houses with the real estate agent. The 5th was perfect, a small, 2-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. It had a backyard with fruit trees, large windows that let in plenty of light, and a spacious kitchen. The price was reasonable. $300,000. I made an offer that same day. It was accepted. The paperwork would take a month, but I already had my new home. I also signed up for a watercolor class that met on Tuesdays and Thursdays at a community center near my future house. The first class was intimidating. I was the oldest in the group, but everyone was kind. The teacher, a young woman named Maribel, was especially patient with me. By the end of the class, I had painted something that vaguely resembled a sunset. It wasn't good, but it was mine, and that filled me with unexpected joy. Miles didn't contact me again during those weeks. Part of me wondered how he was, if he had managed to solve his problems, if he was still angry with me, if he would ever understand. But I didn't seek him out. I kept my word. The ball was in his court. Now he had to decide what kind of relationship he wanted to have with me, if any at all. A month later, I moved into my new house. Brenda helped me with the process. I hired a moving company that transported my few belongings from the old apartment to the new house. I bought new furniture, a comfortable bed, a wide gray sofa, a light wood dining table. I decorated the walls with paintings I bought from local galleries. I planted flowers in the yard. Slowly, day by day, that empty space became my home, a reflection of who I was now, not who I had been. I also began the work with the donation fund. Julian connected me with an organization that worked with vulnerable older women. I visited the center and met some of the women who would benefit from the fund. Widows without pensions, women abandoned by their families, women who worked their entire lives with no savings because everything went to their children. Stories that resonated so much with mine that sometimes I had to step outside to get fresh air so I wouldn't cry in front of them. Seeing the direct impact of the money, seeing how it changed lives, gave purpose to everything that had happened. The inheritance was no longer just money. It was a tool for transformation, not just for me, but for other women who deserved dignity in their golden years. That gave me peace. That gave me meaning. 2 months after our last conversation, I received a letter. It was from Miles, not a text message, but a physical letter, handwritten, sent by mail. I saw it in my mailbox and my heart skipped a beat. I took it inside, made myself some tea, and sat down on my new sofa to read it. The handwriting was Miles. I would recognize that script anywhere. "Mom," it began, "I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I need to write to you even if you don't reply. It's been 2 months since the park, 2 months in which I've had to face myself in ways I never have before. I lost my apartment. I'm living in a rented room, sharing a bathroom with 3 other tenants. I got a job at a warehouse loading boxes. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I'm paying off my debts little by little." The letter continued. "At first, I was furious with you. I thought you had tricked me, that you had set a cruel trap for me. But over time, I started to understand. You didn't set a trap for me, Mom. You gave me a chance to be the son I should have always been. And I failed. I failed because Chloe had convinced me that you were the problem, because it was easier to blame you than to take responsibility, because I never really grew up." My eyes filled with tears reading his words. He continued, "Now I understand everything you sacrificed for me. Now that I have to work hard just to pay the rent, I understand what it meant for you to work 3 shifts to buy me school supplies. Now that I'm alone, I understand the value of having someone who loves you unconditionally. And I lost that. I lost the only person who was always there for me, because I was a coward, because I was selfish, because I was blind." The last part of the letter said, "I'm not writing to ask you for money. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness yet. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that I'm sorry. I really am sorry, Mom, and I'm working on being better, on being the son you deserved. I don't know if we can ever rebuild our relationship, but I want you to know that I love you. I always loved you. I just didn't know how to show it. Take care, Mom. Miles." I finished reading the letter with tears streaming down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something complex, hope mixed with caution, love mixed with pain. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer in my desk. I wouldn't reply yet. I wasn't ready yet. But I kept it, because maybe someday I would be. That night, I sat in my backyard under the stars. The cool night air caressed my face. I thought about everything that had happened, the inheritance that changed my life, the test that revealed painful truths, the confrontation that freed me, and the transformation that was just beginning. I was 71 years old. Most of my life had passed, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly living, not for someone else, but for me. And if Miles truly changed, if he truly matured and became the man he promised to be in that letter, maybe someday we could have a new relationship. Not like before, never like before, but something different, something built on honesty and healthy boundaries, something real. But if not, if this was all we would ever have, that would be okay too, because I learned something fundamental in these past few months. I learned that my worth didn't depend on being needed. I learned that self-love wasn't selfishness. I learned that it's never too late to start over, and I learned that sometimes the greatest proof of love you can give is letting go, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because only in freedom, in distance, in the pain of consequence, can people truly grow. I looked at the stars and whispered a promise to the universe, a promise to live the rest of my days with dignity, with purpose, with self-love. I had received $5 million, but the most valuable thing I gained wasn't the money. It was getting myself back, and that was priceless. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.